Chapter 6. The problem child learns the weight of responsibility. There's one job I hate more than anything else in the world. A dark loathing crept into Louis's expression as he rammed his shovel into the snow at his feet. Then he used all his strength to heave it up and throw it to one side of the path. "And that's shoveling snow," he grumbled. "Cold. Boring. Never-ending. Just try to name a more pointless job." Owen, beside him, continued to shovel meticulously as he spoke. "It's not never-ending. It doesn't snow that much here. And for all your complaints, you're pretty good at this." "Heh. That'll teach you to underestimate a northerner," Louis said, sniffing with pride and deftly lifting his shovel again. The first snow arrived at Minerva's a week after the end of winter break. It fell all night and stopped in the morning, but there was enough to come up to the students' knees. Those born and raised in the South found the snow a great curiosity, but when Louis woke up and saw the scenery outside his window, he cursed loudly. At Minerva's, shoveling snow fell to whichever students were on outside cleaning duty that day. Louis and Owen just happened to be among their unlucky number. After working with the others on duty to clear out the snow, they headed back into the school building. Louis was by no means frail. A little snow shoveling hardly strained him. But it was still an annoying job first thing in the morning. There are so many things I'd rather be doing right now." That day, during the breaks between classes, Louis took a folded-up map out of his pocket and stared at it. It contained a simplified layout of their campus. Minerva's was surrounded by forests, with the student dormitories to the northeast of the school building and the library to the northwest. A large road led south, connecting to the town of Raglesilb. Louis used that road all the time to get to his part-time job. To the east of the school were the training grounds used for magic battles and practical magecraft. That was where Louis had fought Rutherford before winter break. Considering where the off-limits area is, he thought, the most likely spot is to the north of the training grounds. "You have the look of a schemer." Louis gave a start at the sudden voice from right next to him. He immediately folded the map and looked up. Rosalie had a hand on his desk and was staring closely at him. She met his gaze. Her eyes weren't big and round like those of some girls, but were sharp and cool. And that made her glares especially intimidating. "It's nothing," said Louis, quickly tucking the map under his textbook. Rosalie continued to look at him with suspicion. Louis chose his next words carefully. "I've been studying barrier techniques with Ms. Mager lately. I got curious about how the one for magic battles works. I was just checking the map to see how far it reaches." That wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the full truth. Rosalie maintained eye contact for a few more moments. Then she sighed. "I see. That's all well and good. But don't do anything dangerous, all right?" She withdrew, but not before glancing once more at the map he'd slid underneath his textbook. After school, Louis went back to his dorm and threw a cloak over his uniform. Then he wound some rags around his boots and tightened them with a string. While he didn't expect to be out until dark, he also grabbed his lantern and hid a bottle of spirits in his cloak's pocket for warmth, just in case. "The sun sets early in winter," he thought. "I should hurry. I have to find it." He left the dorms, kicking the leftover snow on the path out of the way as he headed for the forest to the north of the training grounds. It has to be somewhere in that off-limits area. A piece of land that's thick with mana. While studying barrier techniques under Mager, Louis learned that the bigger you wanted to make a barrier, the more mana you had to expend. It didn't take much for a small shield for personal protection, but the magic battle barrier was both complicated and had to cover a very wide area. No single mage would have enough mana to make it work. He assumed they were using a magical item of some sort as an aid, but you could only imbue an object with so much mana. That was when Louis began to wonder. Did the barrier draw mana from somewhere else, just as he had drawn water from the river back home? Ms. Mager said they can't put up the barrier just anywhere. If the condition is that it needs to be placed in a mana-rich area, it would all make sense. Unlike ancient times, when mana density had been high, The modern era had seen a waning in the land's mana reserves. These days, people had less resistance to it, too. If you stayed in a mana-rich area for too long, you risked contracting mana poisoning. Because of that, many places with high mana density were designated as off-limits. Minerva's had cited the danger of wild animal attacks and getting lost as the reason for cordoning off the deeper part of the woods. But in Louis's estimation, it was also because of the area's high mana density. As he stomped through the snow, powder fluttering around his feet, he eventually reached the rope tied between trees that sectioned off the safe zone from the dangerous one. It must be past this rope. Louis lifted it, slipped underneath, and headed deeper into the woods without a shred of hesitation. There was a reason he was looking for an area with a lot of mana. His magic battle against Rutherford before the break had been a painful lesson in the importance of mana capacity. Currently, Louis's capacity was 110. Nothing to scoff at, certainly, but Rutherford had said his was around 180. Normal people generally had less than 50, whereas the measure of a high mage was around 130. The 7 sages, the best mags in the kingdom, were said to require at least 150, no matter what. That put Rutherford's incredible mana capacity into stark perspective. So Louis, his mind set on a rematch, wanted to increase his own capacity at any cost. To do so, it was important both to come into contact with mana on a regular basis and to expend it. While it was by no means a recommended method, spending time in a mana-rich area could also increase one's capacity, or so Louis had heard. Plus, being in such a location would make his mana regenerate faster, allowing him to get more out of his practice. If I want to have a higher mana capacity and hone my skills, practicing in a mana-dense area should be the quickest way. He'd heard that mana capacity peaked in one's teens, and by around 20, it stopped altogether and began to slowly decrease. Louis wanted to use his growth spurt to train as much as he could and exceed Rutherford's capacity. About 20 minutes after passing the rope, he keenly sensed the change in mana density. It wasn't as though the scenery was any different, but his pulse sped up, and he felt a seeping warmth behind his heart. Louis had never gotten drunk, but he wondered if this was what it felt like. Checking how much mana you had left was a lot like checking to see how hungry you were. It was difficult to assign a precise value, but you could make a general guess. And Louis could feel the mana he'd expended during that day's training recovering faster than usual. Found it. The perfect spot to train magecraft. Stop right there, Louis Miller. Suddenly, a sharp voice rang out behind him. He turned and saw a figure heading his way, Rosalie. She stepped through the snow, her gait uncertain as she approached him. The cloak she wore over her uniform was covered in white. She must have tripped and fallen a few times. How did you? I followed your footprints. This place is off limits. You need to leave. Now. Cheap lies would never get past Rosalie. Maybe it would be best to simply explain his reasoning honestly. But before he could, Rosalie lowered her voice. I bet you were planning to practice magecraft here where the mana is dense. How did you figure it out? Students weren't supposed to know about this place. Louis hadn't, at least, and it wasn't written on the maps at school. He was quietly shocked. Rosalie frowned, and her gaze turned dark. Her tone was self-deprecating. Because I understand. I've thought about the same thing. Louis hadn't expected that. Rosalie was an honors student, always so fussy when it came to rules. And yet she'd considered doing the same thing he was attempting now. He would have never guessed. Rosalie grabbed her cloak at the chest and squeezed. 20, she said, lips pale. Replied Louis. That's my mana capacity. It's barely increased at all since my first year in the beginner course. The average for intermediate course first years at Minerva's was 70. It was said that a lower-level mage required a capacity of at least 50. Rosalie wasn't even close to that minimum line. Of course she wasn't taking magic battle class. She didn't have the mana for it. Louis figured the most she could manage was a few spells during practical classes, before she was tapped out for the day. A chill wind blew, knocking small piles of snow off the trees. Rosalie pushed her hair behind her ears, bitterness coming over her face. First in our grade on written exams, and last in mana capacity, she said. That's all Rosalie Verde, the daughter of a sage, can achieve. A sage, repeated Louis. That would make her parent one of the greatest mags in the kingdom, wouldn't it? He was dumbfounded. Rosalie nodded. My father is Bartrand Verde, one of the 7 sages. Also known as the Aquamancy Mage. Now Louis understood why all their classmates and teachers treated Rosalie with such respect. But at the same time, he felt as though he'd just swallowed a big clump of cold snow. She was the daughter of one of the greatest mags to ever live. Naturally, those around her expected a lot from her. And she was doing her best to live up to those expectations, but mana capacity was a constitutional trait. Though it was said one could increase it through training, many never saw results. I thought about it so many times, she said. If I trained in a mana-dense area, maybe I'd increase my mana capacity. Maybe I'd catch up to everyone else. With every word, white puffs of air leaked from her mouth, then vanished. The sun was about to set behind grey winter clouds. It was already starting to get dark. I could break the rules and push myself to train, she continued. But what if it had lasting after effects? What if it caused problems for those around me? What if it brought shame to my father's name? When I thought about all that, I couldn't bring myself to cross the rope line. Rosalie was usually so calm and collected. But now she was desperate, almost grievously so. Louis felt like a piece of his heart was being gouged out. I don't want you to have those regrets. All he had to do was talk back. Tell her he was different. That he didn't have a father to cause problems for. He could just laugh it off. But the words wouldn't come. Rosalie had stopped herself in front of the ropes, not wanting to make trouble for others. And yet she'd crossed them now in order to persuade Louis to turn back. He felt the weight of that truth settle onto his shoulders. He knew what it was, the weight of his responsibility for dragging Rosalie into this. And her burden was many times heavier than his. As he stood there, speechless, Rosalie hung her head, covering her mouth with a hand. Her cheeks, which had been flushed red by the cold, had suddenly lost their color. Now they were pale white. Rosalie, cried Louis, running over to her. She dropped to her knees, still covering her mouth. Her slender brows were knotted in pain, and an awful sweat covered her forehead. She shut her eyes tight. I feel sick, she said weakly. That was only natural. This place was off limits. Its mana density was too high. A person could only take in so much mana before reaching capacity. If they took in more, the mana would accumulate inside other organs, potentially causing serious symptoms. It could even be life-threatening. The lower someone's mana capacity, the less mana they could absorb at once, and the easier it became for them to contract mana poisoning. Louis removed his cloak and threw it around Rosalie, then picked her up on his back. She was already freezing, her whole body was cold. To make matters worse, she'd worn normal shoes, not meant for walking through snow. They were a mess now that she'd trudged this whole way. At this rate, she'd get frostbite. This sheltered girl, this daughter of a sage, had probably never walked for so long through the snow before. And it was all Louis's fault. Ah, damn it. Damn it, damn it, he thought. His swears were all aimed at himself. He'd been so stupid, dragging Rosalie into this. Cursing himself with every foul word he knew, he began walking through the snow, Rosalie on his back. Woodman, the resident doctor at the school's infirmary, was a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, stubble, and a tired countenance. His worn-out white coat seemed to hang over his thin body as he leaned lazily against the back of his chair, then turned to look out the window. I'm an old man, you see, he said. You kids are always finished with your classes at the same time. So shouldn't the rest of us get to stop working for the day? I'd really rather not do any extra. Outside the window, it was already past sundown. Louis had dashed through the darkness with an unconscious Rosalie on his back and barged into the infirmary. He glared at Woodman, panting. What's the best way to threaten this man into doing his job? Louis earnestly considered a few possibilities. But soon, Woodman stood up with a grunt. If you'd just gotten into a fight, Mr. Miller, I'd tell you to take care of yourself. But I can't leave mana poisoning to an amateur. Lay her down right there, he said, gesturing toward a bed with his chin. Louis let Rosalie off his back and laid her down. Why someone like you working in Minerva's infirmary, old man? Well, this old man just happens to know both medicine and magecraft, Woodman replied. I'm quite an impressive old man, you see. Quit calling yourself an old man. It's creeping me out. It's a gesture of humility. I'm demonstrating that I know my age. You'll understand when you're older. Not if I have anything to say about it. Woodman tossed some more firewood into the stove, then set a kettle of water on it to boil. After that, he unlocked a medicine cabinet and took out several fluids and a gemstone that looked like a magical item. In the kingdom of R'dil, imbuing a living thing with mana in any way, whether to cure or to manipulate, was forbidden. Human bodies had relatively low resistance to mana, and doing so could easily induce mana poisoning. Louis had heard that modern magecraft required an immense amount of mana just to heal a little scrape. And what was the point in healing a scrape when the person could die of mana poisoning in the process? For that and other reasons, curative magecraft was not really an established field of study in R'dil. Nevertheless, there were plenty of people suffering from mana-related conditions. Mana poisoning, mana deficiency, mana hypersensitivity, mana hyperabsorption syndrome, spirit possession, and so on and so forth. Such things required people with training in both magecraft and medicine to treat. And at Minerva's, that meant this aging man in a frayed white robe, who seemed less than enthusiastic about his calling. You see, said Woodman, as a fundamental rule, humans mustn't absorb or release too much mana at once. It's like pouring too much water into a tube. It bursts from the inside. Woodman took off Rosalie's shoes, skillfully wiped down her freezing feet, then wrapped them in a cloth he'd soaked in the hot water. Afterward, he placed a blue rock into her hand and closed her fingers around it. What's that? Asked Louis. A magical item? Yes, indeed. It can absorb mana. Back when I was a researcher, I could barely afford one. Minerva's sure is generous. These things are incredibly expensive. The blue rock in Rosalie's hand glowed faintly with the mana it absorbed from her. Woodman had compared the flow of mana to water in a tube, but the thickness of that tube apparently varied from one person to another. The less mana capacity someone had, the thinner their tube. Rosalie could only let her mana out at a trickle. Training in mana-dense areas can force the tube through which mana flows, and the container it accumulates in, to widen and grow larger. But it puts a huge strain on the body. Woodman glanced at Louis. The man must have realized where they'd been. It'd be a huge hassle to report this to the school, so I'd rather not, he continued. But don't do it again, all right? I hate it when people make more work for me. Thanks, mumbled Louis as he dipped another cloth in a bucket of hot water and then wrung it out. Her head hurt. But it wasn't an easy-to-understand, stinging sort of pain. Instead, it felt like different parts of her skull were being gently compressed. Where am I? Rosalie lifted her heavy eyelids and saw curtains. Not window curtains, but the fabric partitions between beds in the infirmary. That must be where she was. Then it all came back to her. She'd chased after Louis, trespassed into an off-limits area, and collapsed, likely with mana poisoning. She found herself lying on a bed, wrapped up in thick blankets so she wouldn't freeze. Her socks were off, so she'd probably come close to getting frostbite. She clenched and relaxed her fingers and toes a few times, making sure she could move them, then she turned over in bed. A familiar uniform greeted her. Slowly, she looked up and locked eyes with Louis, whose face was twisted into a scowl. Louis pursed his lips, then frowned even more deeply. He looked grim. He hated other people underestimating him, so he usually assumed a threatening expression to drive others away. This time, though, it seemed more like he was trying to keep his emotions from coming to the surface. You awake? he asked gruffly. He sounded angry. I can't blame him for that, thought Rosalie, directing a wry smile inward as she remembered what she'd said to him. He'd been trying to work on his magecraft in a mana-dense location, an extremely attractive prospect for anyone who wanted to increase their mana capacity. And Rosalie had stopped him. With a childish excuse, too. She was holding herself back, so he needed to as well. I'm sorry, she said. What are you apologizing for? I told you not to cause trouble for others, but I just caused trouble for you instead. When Louis's expression grew increasingly bitter, Rosalie sat up. Woodman, the resident doctor, yawned. He'd been sitting in a chair, reading a book. Your mana poisoning was minor, he said. Your extremities aren't frostbitten, so you can go now. In fact, I'm kicking you out. I want to go home already. Sorry for causing you trouble, Mr. Woodman, said Rosalie, bowing deeply. The doctor closed his book and looked at Louis. You should learn from her example, Mr. Miller. Or, shut up. Rosalie's cloak and shoes were drying next to the stove. She quickly put them on, then reached for the door. Louis followed her quietly. I'll walk you back, he said. All right. Thank you. As the two of them left the infirmary, Woodman waved after them. Take care, he called. The path back to the dorms that night still had snow on it, and the air felt especially cold. The snow had been shoveled, of course, but what had melted during the day had frozen in the nighttime chill, making the surface very slippery. Rosalie struggled on the frozen ground. Louis walked next to her, a lantern in one hand. He extended his other toward her and grunted. Thanks, she said, taking it. Louis gave her hand a firm squeeze, then he started walking again. For a while, they didn't say anything. Louis still seemed to be sulking. Hey, said Louis, looking ahead angrily. I don't think you caused me any trouble. He must have been talking about Rosalie's apology in the infirmary. While she was struggling to come up with a reply, Louis's parched lips turned down, and his voice lowered to a mumble. I won't go that deep in the forest anymore. You don't need to push yourself like that. I'm sure you'll keep improving. Rosalie was certain he'd become an incredible mage one day. He quickly absorbed and applied everything he learned. In terms of practical skills, he already knew quick chanting, simultaneous maintenance, and defensive barriers. Despite enrolling at Minerva's less than half a year ago, he was already on the verge of knowing just as much and of being just as skilled as a high mage. He wasn't like Rosalie. All she was good at was studying. He makes me jealous. She envied his magecraft skills, of course, but more than that, she coveted his lack of inhibition. He had the strength to stomp all over everyone else's envy and jealousy, then grin like he was invincible. To Rosalie, he was radiant, almost blinding. Rosalie always worried about what others thought. Her status as the daughter of one of the 7 sages constricted her. She could never be like Louis. Hey, are you still unsure about continuing to the advanced course? Asked Louis. Yeah. The classes will require more practical skills, so. To tell the truth, she wanted to progress into the advanced course. She wanted to study more, to learn more. But her mana capacity was just so low. Capacity peaked in a person's teens, so she still had a chance to grow, but she was already below average, even among non-mags. No matter how high it rose in the future, the best she could hope for was the lower end of middling. She hung her head, and Louis squeezed her hand again. She felt a comforting warmth transfer through their gloves from his hand to hers. Magic battle class is tomorrow, right? Said Louis. But I take formula application. So skip it. Come watch. What? Rosalie looked up in surprise. Louis was wearing that invincible, toothy grin of his. It was the smile of a mischievous brat who had just thought up the perfect prank. Tomorrow, I'll prove that you can win even without a high mana capacity. Now that winter break was over, Magic Battle class featured more one-on-one matches. And among the first years in the intermediate course, Adolf Ferren was undefeated. That said, he still hadn't faced Louis Miller, the scholarship student. Today, their matchups would be decided based on grades. That pretty much guaranteed he'd fight Louis. Last term, he kept breaking the rules. It was awful. But now we have a new barrier in place. Inside the new barrier, all physical attacks were nullified. In other words, Louis's old strategy of kicking and punching wasn't going to work anymore. In a pure contest of magecraft, Adolf would win. He'd always been number one in practical skills, ever since the beginner course. Some random country bumpkin could never beat him. As he rallied himself, excited to finally take Louis down, the boy in question approached him. His effeminate face held a vulgar smirk. Suddenly, Adolf glimpsed something sticking out of Louis's pocket, a filthy rag. "Hey! What's that?" he demanded. Louis pushed the cloth deeper into his pocket. "Whoops! Could you see that?" he replied. "It's a handkerchief. That's all." "A handkerchief? Is that what you call that filthy old rag?" For some reason, at Adolf's taunt, Louis's smile deepened. Seeing the two of them talking, the teachers quickly activated the magic battle barrier. Once that was up, they didn't have to worry about Louis lashing out. The teachers for today were Solo, the magic battle teacher, and Rutherford, acting as her assistant. Both had military experience and keenly understood how wicked Louis could be. And it wasn't just the teachers, either. Everyone here was sweating, wondering what the problem child would pull next. Louis eyed the barrier around them closely. Adolf wasn't sure why, but when Louis observed something, he had the habit of squinting his right eye. He was doing so now, too. What's he up to today? Louis was a wily schemer. To fight him, Adolf would have to be even wilier. As Adolf carefully watched his opponent, Louis smirked again, then shrugged. "Don't be so guarded," he said. "Let's have a good match, Adolf Ferren." Then Louis held out his right hand. "He wants to shake hands. Now I'm sure he's up to something." Just to be sure, Adolf looked closely at Louis's palm. He didn't see any needles between his fingers, or anything pasted to his hand. And even if he had a concealed weapon, the barrier would nullify it. Adolf took Louis's hand, and the other boy tightened his grip. Really tightened it. Like he wanted to crush Adolf's fingers. It was painful. "Why, this little?" Not wanting to lose, Adolf returned the squeeze. All the while, Louis watched their hands. "We will now begin the magic battle," announced Solo. "Both of you, to your marks." The two of them walked away from each other until they were 20 paces apart, then they turned back around. "Begin." The moment Solo signaled for them to start, Louis took off at a full sprint. Adolf was chanting an attack spell, but Louis was confident he could run out of the way of most attacks. Adolf pointed the tip of his short staff at Louis and yelled, "Take this." A powerful gust of wind blew from the staff. Adolf's invisible wind arrows, no doubt he loved those. But while you couldn't see the attack, Adolf's gaze always gave away its trajectory. "My feet, huh?" Louis dodged just by jumping to the right. Then he closed the remaining distance between them in a flash and shoved his hand into his pocket. Adolf remained still and began chanting his next spell. There was no fear on his face. Punches and kicks wouldn't affect him. "You idiot." Louis scoffed, his face the picture of wickedness. Then he threw the sand in his right hand straight into Adolf's face. "Gaia!" Adolf cried out and leaned backward, stopping his chant. Louis took the opportunity to get behind his opponent and put him in a headlock. Adolf, blinking his bleary eyes against the sand, desperately tried to peel the other boy's arm away. What are you?" he started to say, before croaking against the pressure. "Hey, don't struggle. You're my classmate. I'm just giving you a nice little hug. We're friends, aren't we?" Ever since losing to Rutherford inside the new barrier, Louis had secretly been searching for a way to get around its effects. It nullified physical attacks, but what, exactly, counted as an attack? He'd tested all sorts of things, and his efforts had led him to a realization. Punching, swinging a weapon, and throwing stones all triggered the barrier. But if the rock was small enough, a tiny pebble, it didn't register, which was why his sand attack had been effective. And the barrier also couldn't detect handshakes, or even squeezing a hand tightly enough to crush it. He'd just proved that. That meant grappling techniques would work just fine. Adolf tried his best to claw at Louis's arm. But because of the barrier, his scratches didn't even leave a mark. Once his resistance weakened, Louis released him and took a few steps away. The boy heaved and panted. His breathing was ragged, but he still managed to turn a hateful glare on Louis before beginning to chant once again. An intermediate-level flame spell, thought Louis. The kind that shoots a fire spear, right? Louis began chanting as well. Adolf finished first. How about this? Shouted Adolf. Flames erupted from his short staff, forming a spear. Magecraft that took the form of a spear was more powerful than spells that divided their strength to form multiple arrows. A hit from that would hurt. As the flame spear approached, Louis remained firmly in place. He dropped his weight slightly and clenched his fist. And then he put up a small, shield-shaped barrier in front of his fist and punched the flame spear. Rah! The smaller the barrier, the easier it was to increase its strength and duration. This one was only slightly bigger than his open palm. It wasn't large enough to cover his whole body, but in return, it was insanely tough. Louis's barrier-wreathed fist scattered the flame spear. Beyond it, Adolf's eyes widened in shock. Keeping the barrier on his right hand, Louis ran up to Adolf and punched him with it. One strike to the gut, and one to the face. Adolf wailed, teary-eyed, as his face twisted. It was working. Strikes like this wouldn't injure anyone inside the barrier, but they still hurt. And because the barrier was made of mana, just like any flame or wind attack, it meant that punching someone with it counted as a mana-based attack. Punching Adolf until his mana ran out would be slow-going, though. Instead, Louis decided to settle things quickly. He knocked Adolf to the ground, face up, got on top of him, and took out his handkerchief, or rather, the sand-covered rag. Then he rolled it up and stuffed it inside Adolf's mouth. MRGH? If you can't use magecraft anymore, you lose, right? That makes things easy. All I have to do is cover your mouth so you can't chant. Louis took another rag out of his pocket and shoved it into Adolf's mouth to gag him. Now he just had to tie up the kid's hands and feet, and this match would be over. He glanced into the trees. Rosalie was watching him from behind one, glancing around nervously. See that, Rosalie? Even without a high mana capacity, there's all kinds of tricks you can use to get the job done. He grinned proudly. Rosalie was waving her arms at him. She had panic on her face, she was trying to tell him something. Look up. This happened once before, didn't it? But the moment he realized that, the magic barrier vanished without a sound, and Rutherford's soul crashed into the crown of Louis's head. How many times do I have to tell you to use magecraft, you little brat? Louis rubbed the bump on his head, tears in his eyes. I punched him with a barrier, he wailed. I followed the rules. You know what I mean. Use attack magecraft, you blasted child. Shut up, you old rat. Now that the barrier is down, I've got you. Take this. Louis used his whole body like a spring, leaping to his feet and using the momentum to swing his fist. Rutherford twisted out of the way, then buried his knee in Louis's stomach. With a grunt, Louis stumbled. Then a fist slammed into his nose. Louis went soaring, then tumbled across the ground. Fresh blood from his nose bloomed like flowers upon the lingering snow. Rutherford turned to one side and spat, then twirled his pipe. Maybe next time, brat. I'm an old man, you see. Treating wounds is such a bother. I'd rather not. Just clean it up and get some good rest. That's always best. When Louis walked into the infirmary with a nosebleed and covered in dirt, Woodman, who was busy reading a book, met him with a look of utmost annoyance. Louis held his nose, it was still bleeding, and let out a muffled groan. Just do your job, old man. There's some cotton, cloth, and water around here somewhere. You're free to use them, the doctor replied, before turning back to his book. Louis clicked his tongue and put on a terrifying expression, but Woodman just ignored him. Resigned, Louis borrowed some cloth from one corner of the room and sloppily wiped his face. When the cloth came away, it was a total mess, riddled with blood and dirt. Then a student called "Excuse me" and came into the room. It was Rosalie. She hastened over to Louis, her expression a mix of anger and exasperation. You really are a handful. She looked fed up, yet her voice was gentle. Was that just his imagination? Rosalie briskly soaked a cloth in a bucket of water, then used it to wipe Louis's face. Up close, she looked dead serious. That was pretty cool, right? What I did. Cool? You have a nosebleed. Completely ignoring Louis's boasting, Rosalie silently continued to clean his face. Did I go too far? Wondered Louis, realizing as he did how out of character it was. Rosalie was on the verge of giving up on the advanced course because of her low mana capacity. He'd wanted to show her that mana capacity wasn't the only thing that mattered. But she was an honors student. Maybe he'd only made her angry. Louis mulled this over, unsure of what to say in such a situation. Then Rosalie mumbled something, caused too many problems, and we won't be able to attend the advanced course together. Louis's eyes shot open. He looked at Rosalie, but she turned away, as if fleeing, and washed the dirty cloth noisily in the bucket. Wiping his still bleeding nose with the back of his hand, Louis flashed her a fearless grin. By that time, I'll be getting better grades than you on our exams. Oh, I'll take that challenge. As Rosalie wrung out the cloth, Louis noticed her expression had brightened, as if she'd been released from some of her burdens.